Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Don't nod off just yet, my class of horror cadavers. Open up your Necronomicons to page 63 and follow along. Today, we're going beyond our limitations with the continuation of Doughboy420's Return to Dreamscape, Part 2, The Beast from Beyond. I had spent hours in the darkness of my cold cell, curled up against the wall, cowering as my fear shook me to the core. I no longer knew what had been real and what had been fake. I now knew how that man had felt. That man, he wasn't crazy. I knew then that I had to talk to him again. Maybe with his help, we could fix this. Maybe we could get out of here. 2 heads are better than 1 after all. But for now, there wasn't anything I could do. After I was satisfied that I was at least relatively safe, I decided that I may as well make myself comfortable. So I climbed up onto the bed that had been pushed against the wall beside the door, and eventually I fell asleep. I was exhausted from terror, and I could no longer keep my eyes open. I awoke to the sound of my large metal door creaking open. "Good morning," said the calm voice of a man. I quickly clambered against the wall, curling into a ball, watching the man, waiting for him to make his move. "Don't worry, it's all right. Come on down to breakfast when you're ready," the young man said. He had dirty blonde, shaggy hair, brown eyes, and he wore all white, which let me know that he was an orderly. The man left the door open and turned to walk down the hallway toward the cafeteria. When I was satisfied that the man was gone and that it was safe to approach the door, I slowly crawled up off the bed and made my way over to the now open door. The sun shined in through the hallway windows, lighting up the path that led along the east end of the building. I poked my head around the frame of the door and into the hallway. It was mostly empty aside from a few patients and nurses heading here and there. Everything appeared to be all right, almost normal. As normal as waking up in a real-life nightmare in a completely foreign life could be. Just yesterday, I was a journalist with a pretty average life. Today, I'm a madman locked in an institution with no memory of how I got here. Had I always been here? Who am I? What's happening to me? I thought. All of these questions raced through my head as I made my way down the hallway, approaching the cafeteria where I had hoped to find the man who killed his uncle. I had hoped that the man would have some answers. I rounded the corner and found myself in a wide open room, with hustle and bustle. Dozens of patients sat around various tables, most of them eating, while others chose to smear their mashed potatoes and peas all over themselves and the walls. This prompted nurses and orderlies to put a stop to it and forcibly remove them. People were yelling and screaming, fighting and throwing tantrums, but as I said, that was swiftly taken care of by the orderlies, injecting them with a sedative and then carrying them out of the room. The people in this place appeared to have a zero-tolerance policy for those who acted out, and I made note of that. I didn't want to get on their bad side and end up in an even worse situation than I was already in. "Hey!" a familiar voice yelled from the other end of the room. I looked opposite from where I was to find the man that I had interviewed, sitting at a table by a window on the far end of the room. He motioned for me to come over, and I did so, moving around the tables and people to find my way to his table, tucked against the far wall. "Hey, what the hell's going on here? Why am I here? How long have I been here? Who am I? Who are you?" I quietly assaulted the man with one question after another, which almost sent him into a panic. Shh, be quiet! I don't want them to hear you," the man instructed me. "What the hell is all this?" I asked in a hushed tone. "Have a seat, and I'll tell you what I can," the man said, motioning for me to sit across from him at the table. After doing so, the man blabbered about the Dreamscape again, going on and on with his incessant madness, and I quickly realized that he wasn't going to be much help. I sighed in discontent and leaned back into the chair, looking out the window. "Hey!" the man yelled at me. "What?" I asked him. "You listen to me, you little shit. You listen, and you listen well. That beast is around every corner. He watches you and me. He's watching us right now. I can feel his eyes upon me like a cockroach crawling across my skin. I know what he wants, and I won't give it to him. So, he's hoping to trick you like he tricked me. Don't give in. Don't listen to him. He's a liar. He is a fiend. Don't listen to him. Don't listen to anyone," the man spat out at me. "What does he want?" I asked him. "He wants to free them. The ancient ones. The primordial gods of old. They are the cruel beings that traveled across the cosmos from a time before time. Don't listen to his lies. He will offer you freedom. He will offer you peace. He will offer you paradise. Please, please, don't listen to him," the man explained and pleaded with me, begging me not to give in to the beast's temptations. All right, I won't listen to him," I said. "But how do I know not to listen to you? How do I know what's real and what isn't anymore?" I asked him, beginning to panic. "You don't," he said bluntly. "Just don't listen to him," he added. "How do I get out of here? I'm not supposed to be here," I asked him. "You don't," he said again, this time with a bit of sorrow in his voice as he looked down to the table. "What?" I asked him. "You don't get out. They won't ever let us leave," he said. "What? Why not?" I asked him, a bit agitated now. "Shh! You won't like what happens if they have to sedate you, and I'm sorry, but there's no way out. They need us to get what they want, and they won't let us go until we help them," the man answered. "Then why don't we help them?" I asked. "Are you that dense? Have you not been listening?" he asked. "He wants to free the primordial gods, the ancient ones, from the time before time. The gods of a long-dead religion, a religion that consisted of a suffering power, a trade of life for life, from a cruel and horrible religion that had been long forgotten, probably forgotten by choice, and if these things return, the world will be plunged into chaos once again. We can't allow that to happen," he explained. "So, you're telling me that we're stuck here?" I asked him. "I'm afraid so," he answered. "What?" I exclaimed. "No, I don't belong here. I'm not supposed to be here. Let me go. Let me out of here," I yelled, screaming at the man and everyone around me as I began to panic. I didn't want to be there. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was a journalist from the city. I was a normal man with a normal life. I didn't kill anybody. I didn't break any laws. I was sane. I was completely sane. I didn't belong in this place. just as those before me were quickly silenced by a calming sedative shot. I felt hands grasp me around my neck and waist, grabbing me from behind. This was followed by a pinch in my arm as a needle was driven into me, delivering a drug into my system, a drug which quickly caused the room to start spinning. My legs turned into jelly, and I fell into the grasp of the orderlies. I tried to speak, but I only mumbled. Inaudible, slurred words escaped my lips. Before I knew it, my eyes rolled into the back of my head, and the room went dark. It was hours before I woke up. At least, I assume it was hours, because it had been morning when I had left my room to go to the cafeteria, and now it was pitch black within the cell that I laid in. I tried to sit up and observe my surroundings, but I found that I could not move at all. I was strapped down onto a cold, flat surface. I felt around beneath me, moving my hands from my sides to the edge of the surface upon which I laid. The edges had a raised lip at a 90-degree angle that came up about an inch or so from the base, which led me to believe that I was laying upon a metal table, tightly strapped to it with thick leather straps. I struggled a bit, which caused the table to shake and creak with a screeching sound of metal upon metal. But I could not escape. "Hello?" I said aloud. "Where am I?" I asked. I only heard silence. Deafening silence. "Hello?" I called out a bit louder. "I'm sorry about that outburst. I'll behave now. Please let me go," I said, attempting to bargain with my captors. It was then that one of the doors swung open, shining a dim red light into the room. I looked down at the door beyond my feet and could see the door and the figure that had opened it. A tall, beastly silhouette stood in the door. A large, ominous shadow towered over me, a shadow whose form nearly filled the doorway from side to side. It was a figure that spanned the gap nearly from one end to the other of the large set of double doors. The beastly shadow would have been tall enough to hit its head upon the top of the door. That is, if it had a head. The tall, monstrous creature was a headless beast. I screamed as the monster approached me, and as it came into view, I could see that its skin was a pale gray color. The concave area where the head and neck should have been was a series of skin folds that curled inward in a disgusting fashion. The creature then reached out with a giant hand toward me, a hand that could have easily encompassed my head. The hand's size was not the scariest part of it. It was the palm of the hand that truly terrified me. The palm of this creature's hand held a large, gaping mouth with rows upon rows of hooked, salivating teeth that extended into the long, dark tunnel back into the monster's arm. I continued to scream in terror, struggling and fighting to find freedom from this beast, but it was of no use. The creature ripped the thick leather bands that held me down like they were strands of thread and quickly grabbed me before throwing me over its shoulder, or rather, it was more like the disgusting mounds of slimy flesh that curled into its body upon the space where a head should be, than a shoulder. But who's arguing semantics? The creature then held me down onto this sickening surface between its arms. I nearly vomited several times as the monstrous thing carried me out of the room and into a long hallway. The red light that I had seen shining from the outside of the room was actually that of several fires that burned beyond the barred windows within the long, open hallway, 1,000 fires raging within the fuel of 1,000,000 corpses. Millions of corpses piled on top of one another in thousands of bonfires that lit the way. The smell of roasting flesh filled the air. This is what caused me to lose it. I coughed and hacked several times before finally vomiting a thick, brown liquid upon the creature's back. The beast paid me no mind and continued onward through this damned place that I could only assume was a hell beyond hell. After a long while, the hallway opened up into a large room. This room was again dark, but I didn't need to see to know what was happening. I heard a sound like a slurping or squishing, the slimy sound of a viscous liquid cascading over a wet surface. My fears were soon realized as my eyes adjusted to the extremely low light of the room. The walls were a mass of disgusting flesh and muscle tissue, like a rotting gray flesh that coated, nay, compromised the walls of the room. Slimy, decaying flesh that hung from bone and dripped with viscous, blackened blood. The room was a conglomeration of rotten flesh and bone that appeared to wriggle and writhe as if it were living. But it was then that I realized that this was not the wall itself that was living, but what was within the walls. It was an impossible number of creatures that creeped and crawled inside the skin of the barrier, chewing away at the flesh and burrowing in to create a home. Spiders, flies, centipedes, maggots, beetles, and bugs of all kinds swarmed around nearly every surface of the room, filling the large, rounded room with a chorus of slurping and buzzing noises. It was a disgusting cacophony of hideous sounds, but the most terrifying thing that I saw crawling upon the walls were large, thin creatures. They were bug-like monstrosities with long, spindly legs that clung to the walls, each with hook-like fingers. The beasts were a kind of pale green color. They had a series of 6 eyes in 2 rows of 3 that spanned their foreheads, each eye in the row a bit smaller than the last. All in a symmetrical array, a series of 6 eyes that appeared to be clouded white, from what I could see. Eyes blinded from living in endless darkness. The things had long, narrow slits along each side of the entire length of their heads, out from which grew hundreds of thick, hair-like fibers, hairs that appeared to vibrate when the creature would make a clicking sound, like a kind of echolocation. But just as the room was filled with noise and disgust, it quickly, once again, fell into silence. It was the same deafening silence as before, an uncomfortable quiet where not even the once thundering footfalls of the beast could be heard. Now, only an endless muteness as the room once again fell into darkness. Then, I heard it. The echoing sound of loud squishing, very similar to the walls in the room before, but the sound was followed by an echoing thud upon the floor within the cavernous chamber. This was followed by another slurping squish and another loud, liquidy thud. I peered up over my shoulder to look toward the ceiling. The disgusting, flesh-like surface of the previous room had turned into a smooth, stone ceiling. But this kind of comforting stone surface did not last long. I soon saw a morbid growth of some kind, similar to the flesh of the room before, but more like a fungus that stretched across the ceiling in every direction. A white fungus-like structure, filled with rips and tears, and large masses and patches of morbid growths. The fungus grew larger and thicker until it once again resembled flesh. But this flesh was more solid. It had more shape. Unlike the skin and bone within the previous rooms, this flesh was alive. The membranous fungus curled down in several rows before folding back once again into the ceiling, forming a ribbed surface along the ceiling of the room. It was dripping with a slimy liquid, very similar to the room before. It appeared as though a large creature spanned the length of the ceiling of this room. A gargantuan, slug-like beast clung to the surface of the ceiling. The slimy slug flesh of the creature then curled inward to form a mouth that looked very similar to the curls of flesh upon the shoulders of the beast that had carried me. like a sphincter that soon spat out a large, egg-like sack. The sack splashed down onto the floor with thick waves of goo that were flung into the air to once again fall down to the floor. Then, through the membranous sack, ripped a large hand, a large, mouthed hand, filled with rows upon rows of curled fangs. This was followed by the muscular arm of another large, headless beast. This slug-like creature was birthing these monstrosities. I was carried forward. The slug's girth grew larger and larger before it finally began to thin out again. Just as I thought, I was about to reach the tail end of the beast. The room curled downward, and so too did the beast's body. It soon connected with a larger body. I was terrified to discover that the massive, grotesque slug was, in reality, the head of a much larger beast. This was a titanic monster with a tentacle-like slug for a head and a humanoid body, a giant humanoid body, chained to a large throne. The throne was carved into the rock of the wall. The creature had leathery, graying skin that was covered with a mazework of thick black veins. Its gargantuan fingers and toes had claws that had long grown inward, curling around to dig back into the beast's own hands and feet, which left wounds that were filled with maggots and infection. It was as if this beast was creating an army to invade the world above, to invade the world of man, and return the earth to darkness and endless suffering. The beast that carried me then tossed me down onto the cold surface of the stone floor. Then I heard it, a whispering voice echoing within my mind. The voice spoke. "Let me go!" I yelled. "No, you're a liar!" I replied. The creature added. I was then grabbed around each limb by a different set of hands. 4 large, monstrous beasts grabbing me around my waists and ankles to once again strap me down onto a cold, metal table. I kicked and screamed, struggling to free myself from the creature's grasp and from the table that held me down. But it was to no avail. Then, as I struggled for freedom, one of the long, slender, bug-like beasts approached me from behind my head and looked down upon me from several feet above, before slowly lowering its head down toward mine until we were face to face. The long, hair-like structures that stuck out of the sides of its face then began to grow longer, curling downward toward me like long, thin fingers or tentacles reaching for me. The hairs danced and tickled across my face like wet silk fibers. But they soon went rigid as the ends of the hairs dug deep into my skin and pierced my skull. I was then hit with an immense pain, like thousands of volts of electricity rocketing into my brain. My body went rigid, just as the hairs and my fingers curled inward, digging my nails into my palms, causing them to bleed. My eyes rolled back into my head and then rolled forward once again. The room was now filled with a white light, and I realized that I was once again in the hospital, laying strapped onto a cold metal table. Doctors were standing over me, odd medical instruments in hand, and I felt the burning sensation upon my temples. I soon lost consciousness.
Well, if you're itching for what happens next, don't worry, the conclusion is sure to follow. Of course, as one chapter ends, the next begins, and this book of death isn't over yet. But if you can't wait to get back to the lake, make sure to float like the dead back here next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.